Brought to you by Knights of Awakening. This is the Labyrinth. Today's topic is somewhat inspired, I guess, by the video that Alethea did. Actually, it's more inspired by the constant back and forth that happens in the mystical communities, and that has to do with dogma, ethics, and systems of magic. And the reason it covers all three is because they are intricately tied into how magic works on some level, and a lot of people really don't realize that. And one of the big things is to actually tear into dogma at this point. And I'm not a fan of dogma, but I do recognize that a suspension of disbelief is necessary to achieve magical operation, to achieve results within it. So before we go any further, I want to thank all of you for joining us. We do this because you're there cheering us on. Your likes, your shares, and subscribes are what cause us to come back and do this again and again, because we enjoy knowing that we've reached you and we made a difference. That's first note. Second note, this will get shaved eventually, and this is coming back in. Yeah, an overwhelming result of the internet poll, it seems, whether or not a poll was taken, an overwhelming result, a vote of nearly 50,000 to 1, has shown that my beard was favored. My wife's 49,999 votes notwithstanding, I'm going to regrow the beard. So, just to let you all know, no, it's not that I've gotten lazy on shaving. On that it is, on the hair, but that'll be going soon enough. So, thank you all for joining us, and we're going to hit on dogma and ethics first. And the reason is because they're intertwined in a lot of ways. Dogma and ethics are a type of construct, and within this, it is really important to hit on what dogma is. And I actually pulled up a quick definition of it from Google, and it says a principle or set of principles laid down by an authority as incontrovertible truth. And this is going to get really important because, as I say, it is a system. And this is what we tend to forget really in the long term with these things, is that they are systems. All methods of ethics, all manner of dogma, all concepts of right and wrong are based on a moral system that you're raised within or that you subscribe to for whatever purposes. And it interrelates to magic because magic works on the concept of systems of focus. We make right and wrong real to us based on our own dogma. And our dogma may not necessarily be inherited dogma. See, there's this big concept that all dogma is bad, and that's not completely good. You see, you have your own personal dogmas. If you make the decision that you'll never kill, or that you'll never strike another in violence, that's a personal dogma, and it may be right for you, and if it is, that's great. If you make the decision that you'll never use magic to sway the interest of a lover, that's personal dogma based on what you feel is right, what you feel is wrong, or based on another system. And the reason I say that is a lot of times we inherit a system without analyzing it. And part of the sorcerer's path, part of the shaman's path, is to look inward and find out why we do what we do. Really pull it apart and ask, is this arbitrary? Is this something someone else handed to me? And because I liked them, I liked it? Is this something that inspired me at one point and then I hung on to the values and it no longer inspires? And this is the question you've got to ask yourself within dogma. What you do eventually in pulling dogma apart, you find things that you personally do believe. You find things that are real for you and that you have a reason for believing. You may believe that it is wrong to sway the affections of another with magic. That was a really good example that I just brought up that I think we're going to kind of bat around a little bit. And in that's a personal dogma because you've determined that you would not want it done to you. And that you believe that it's harmful to the other person and harmful to you to do so, having a wider view. Knowing that in the moment it may feel right, but knowing you've taken the time to look at the longer view of what that'll do, and that you know that it won't turn out well for anyone, you make that decision. That's personal dogma. That's perfectly fine, and that's acceptable. The big problem is when we inherit dogma. All left-handed people are evil, or I don't know. We've got a blood makes the grass grow, makes the crops grow. So we've got to make sure we have war for Thor. There, we'll use a Norse one. That's passed down dogma. That's something someone else told you, and you believe it. And you hold it to be an incontrovertible truth up until you question it and determine that it is not. And passed down dogma tends to be not as functional in your day-to-day life or in your personal life. So I fully recommend that you analyze your dogmas. Now, how does this relate to magic? Because systems of magic work under a very similar method. They are usually passed down to us in part or in whole, and we make them real by our focus, by our intent, by our intensity, by the fact that we give power to them, but also by the fact that other people gave power to them. There's a lot of psychology that goes into magic, but at the end of the day, it is more to do with your ability to empower a system through intensity and focus. That's what everything does, is drive intensity, drive focus, and drive energy. The question you've got to ask with a system of dogma is it grounded in reality? Is it grounded in life? Is it functional? Does it help you? Does it aid you? Does it make the world a better place? And if it isn't, you need to toss it out. Now, ethics are a little bit different than dogma. Ethics are a view of right and wrong, not necessarily just something passed down, but right and wrong on the world as a whole. And they are often something that's personal, but they're also often something that's passed down. So they are connected to dogma in that they are often something handed down to us as an incontrovertible truth. Ethics that are built in that way are dogma. Ethics that are not analyzed and really knocked around a bit inside our own internal space of understanding are just something else someone handed to us. And they really don't have any meaning to us. They have meaning to us because someone else handed them to us and because we bought into that. But they don't have any true meaning. They don't really have any purpose in our lives at that point. They often become chains because we don't understand the why of ethics. So the question is, should ethics be flexible? And I think, yes, they should. An ethic should be based on the situation. To rewind the clock a little bit, I said that, this was very, very slimly inspired by Alethea's videos recently as it concerned murder with mysticism. Anyone who thinks I'm telling you should go out and plot a murder with magic, you really don't understand me, and you've not watched any of the Labyrinth recently, or at all, ever. You probably don't know me on any level if you think I would say that, and wow, seriously? But there's a big definition of what murder is, and murder technically could be extended to any act of killing in self-defense or for survival. And in that sense, ethics should be flexible. Ethics of defense are certainly one of the most flexible things out there. And anytime you're going into conflict with another, you have to recognize that your ethics must be flexible in both directions. You cannot hold an ethic realistically. In the modern society, it says, if I am insulted or harmed in any way, I shall smite my enemy with one strike. All right there, one punch dipshit, You may be able to end it in one hit, one punch, as they say, to pick on the anime that's very popular right now. But should you, based on an insult, based on anything like that? Well, the truth is no. Your ethics should be flexible enough that you understand that there are degrees of insult, degrees of injury, and that not everything warrants a death strike. By the same token, while you should strive, ideally, as a moral person, to never strike to kill, you have to recognize there are times when you're not going to have much of a choice. And that is life. And that is the nature of why ethics tend to fail for so many people, because they try to turn them into dogma. They try to make them incontrovertible without considering the situations at hand. There are many, many situations in which you can use magic in ways that outside of that moment would not be ethical, or even in that moment aren't ethical, and you realize it later and then have to rework who you are to deal with that so that you don't make that mistake again. But in the moment of deciding to do something that would otherwise be unethical, let's use binding someone, for example. To bind their power, one of the hardest things on the planet to do, and to make it last, which is almost impossible against another trained mystic. To bind someone's power is really probably the most unethical thing I think you could do. Killing them is actually nicer in some ways. If full binding removes their influence over the world around them, it removes their ability to affect the world, and even in the sense of do no harm, it means that they cannot ever be promoted in their place of work. They can never move up in society, because if they're moving up, someone else obviously isn't. That's doing harm. You do a binding well enough, and that's way more damaging than any curse you'd ever do. And yet there are some situations where a binding may be permissible. There are some situations where someone crosses a line, and you're like, you know what, I need to stop them through this measure. And if that fails, then you have to start looking at measures that are a little bit more permanent. And that is life. That is the nature of conflict. And you will likely never run into that in your day-to-day practice. You probably don't know enough other sorcerers, enough other shamans or wizards of any form that this is that big of a risk. But if you're circling around in the different communities, it could be a risk to you. You may have to make the decision one day to take a life to save a life. And that's where you have to weigh the value of the ethic versus the value of the action to the world around you, to yourself, and make a judgment call based on a higher level of ethics. And, you know, a lot of people don't like that. Everyone likes to put things cut and dry and in stone. We love to have laws that are, the law says this, the rule says that, and there's a reason there are so many murderers and rapists out on the street right now. In question of the ethics of killing someone who's been effectively committed of a crime, but, you know, dismissed on a technicality, I'm going to hit on this just if there's any Jedi watching. From a Jedi point of view, no, you don't have the right. For everyone else, this is why I'm not a Jedi. Nuke them! Wipe them out, if you're certain. If you are beyond any concept of a reasonable doubt. And what I mean by this is that a technicality that is so technical that it's obviously a clerical error type of situation, not something where there was conflicting evidences and you're not sure how to deal with it. But hey, sometimes, you know, one little rule is enough. Maybe they weren't read their Miranda rights fast enough or at the right moment, or maybe some violation in processing. Their fingerprints weren't taken correctly. I don't know. I know there are a lot of loopholes out there to get around the justice system, and I'm not an attorney. I'm not quite that evil. So, not that all attorneys are evil. Actually, I've met quite a few nice ones, but the joke still stands. With that, you know, my personal view, yeah, wipe them out. I don't see any problem with that. I see that the world is flawed, and sometimes we've got to do what is right or what is easy. Anyone who's going to tell you that's going to be easy, no. Anytime you take a life through magic or other means, it is hard. It leaves a mark on you, and anyone who doesn't understand that has never had the mark left on them. The same thing happens when you kill, though, with your bare hands. Just of note, real quick, some of the different debates on animal sacrifice and killing, murder, killing with magic, this, that, and the other, that have come up through different communities, because, you know, animal sacrifice is another one. Most people who argue this have never taken an animal's life. Now, I've not killed an animal in ritual sacrifice, but I've killed chickens to eat. Long story short, it became a question of rehoming chickens that couldn't be rehomed because there was no one who wanted them, and being able to survive as well as eating the food. So I took an axe and I chopped their heads off. And I'm going to tell you, if you don't think that leaves a mark, you're an idiot. You're a fool. You have no concept of what it does. Okay? If it's a clean cut, it's not as bad. The first one wasn't, though. And that leaves an even bigger mark. You will never, ever truly understand what it means to take a life until you've taken one, either with magic or with your bare hand. And honestly, the mark that it leaves with the bare hand is the same as it does with magic, at least the first time. The first time you realize you've done it, it impacts you, and it drives you to nightmares, and it messes with the way you see the world. And anyone who doesn't understand that has not done it. Anyone who doesn't understand that has never taken a life in any capacity. And when you speak from a point of view of not having experience on a thing, then you're speaking from a point of view of ignorance. And I have nothing for that. So finally, systems of magic within this. Okay, we've determined that, ethics do need to be flexible. Systems of magic are constructs that are taken. Let's pull up the Dogma quote here. They're constructs that are laid down by an authority as incontrovertible truth. You may be the authority in that. You may very well be the authority in those constructs. You may not. But they are taken as an incontrovertible truth. That is what a system of magic is. That is what they are meant to be while you're using them. You have to buy into the system to use it. You have to believe it as an incontrovertible truth. And that is why we make so many modifications to our systems. We shift things around constantly because most systems are not an incontrovertible truth to us because we are not born and raised in the traditions that the system was created in. So we mix and we match a bit. But the concept of the system is that to you it must be an incontrovertible truth. This is where any system of magic becomes dogma. Oh my goodness! How'd that happen, right? It's going to happen. In fact, if your system of magic is not dogma, then it fails on some level. And what I mean by that, you must believe it as a truth that it works, that it's real, that it is functional, that by doing X you're going to get Y. And if you don't have the kind of mind that can put you into that mind frame, if you're sitting there tearing it down, pulling it apart, questioning it, and putting it back together, it's not going to do anything for you. But we have those systems because those systems are necessary to focus the mind to intent. They are necessary to allow us to suspend disbelief by creating a system that gives the mind the psychological jogging exercise. We achieve more. So it's important to recognize a duality here. A duality is two things that are true and yet oppositional. It is true that every system of magic on some level is a construct and it is a form of dogma. And yet we should always be analyzing the why and the how of it to better enable us to create our own personal system that is true and real and right and, unopposable. Dogma, systems of magic, and ethics kind of mix in the fact that they are all mental constructs. You will not find me 1 ounce of dogma, 1 atom of magical systems, or 1 particle of ethics in the entire universe. They don't exist. They're along the same design as constructs like justice and hope and the knightly virtues. And they mean something to you because they are functional in your world and they bring something to it. And that's what's important within this. That may be the core message of this. The final idea here with the systems of magic, and I guess this is kind of the meat of this show for the day. This is really the most important part, even if it's not the biggest part. Hey, sometimes you have a smaller serving of meat because it's just that good. Solidity found within a system loses cohesion once you break the system. What this means is once you take a system and you are not consciously altering it and then adhering to it as a system, again, applying your own personal dogma to it, giving it that importance. Once you're not doing that and you're just kind of like, I didn't feel like doing the cleansing today. Does it really matter? Once it loses importance in your mind, you break the system. It has no power anymore. You are not giving it power to carry out your will, and therefore your will through it has nothing. This is where it's become so very important to respect the system you're working with. Even if you alter the system, you must respect the alteration as truth, as law. You must make it real. You must give it a point of purpose. And this is for every system. This is for every system. This is for everything. This goes all the way from mysticism to martial arts. If you go into martial arts and you alter the movements to better fit your body, that's fantastic. But if you sit there and you just alter the movements for the heck of it, and you say, well, it's just not that important, so I do it this way, you're going to have a lack of faith in your ability to implement those methods to defend yourself. And ultimately, you're going to get your ass kicked. Hey, that's life, that's magic, that's how it works. Maybe that should be my slogan, but I kind of like the slogan we got hanging around here better anyway. So with all of that, we've covered the constructs. We've covered why they are what they are. I've given a little background on why this video exists. Like I said, this is not really a response to Alethea's video. I know that she's probably going to take it as one, and it's not. This is a response to the overall metaphysical community. I see 1,000 times a day, do no harm. And, I've always preferred do no harm but take no shit. I believe that you have to be a little bit flexible within your moral code in this world, because if you're not, then the evolution of your moral code will lead you to inaction and lead you to an inability to protect yourself or others. My thoughts on Magick as a final response point, since I know Allie's going to want me to hit on this a little. In reference to her topics, my personal view is you should use the least amount of force possible to resolve any conflict up until the point that you no longer have any other options left. That's in all forms of conflict. I also believe you should treat mysticism with the same gravity that you do physical concepts, physical conflict. So if you're in a mystical war, treat an attack the same way you would a punch in the nose, and treat your counterpunch the same way you would. That's about it. That's my view on mysticism. That's my personal ethics. I threw that in there kind of as a gift to a friend of mine who probably will watch this. Again, this really isn't related to that. If this does wind up popping up in the Jedi forums, they're going to have a whole lot of information there that most of them are going to have trouble dealing with, because I'm breaking down the system. And most people can't deal with their systems being broken down. In fact, I think a lot of people will have trouble with this video, because it does break down the system. But I think a lot of people will also be enlightened enough to see what that means and see the value in it. And that's what this is all about. This is about forcing you to wake up internally. That's what it means. Slogan time! To awaken the night within.